All right, guys, thanks so much for listening to the CX Chronicles podcast. Super excited for today's show. Vasco Pedro, welcome to CX Chronicles, my friend.
Thank you, Adrian. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Vasco, why don't you start off today's show, give the CX Nation the story for who you are, and talk about the amazing business that you and your team at Unbabel are building today.
Thank you. Definitely. So a bit about me. So I'm Portuguese. I was born in Lisbon. I've been coding since I was 6. My house was already full of talk about linguistics, and so language has been a passion since forever, and specifically language as a way of understanding a bit more about intelligence and consciousness, and kind of everything that we do with language is quite amazing. And so throughout my undergrad, I did a major in artificial intelligence with a minor in computational linguistics, then went to Carnegie Mellon in the US, did my master's and PhD in natural language processing. And then after that, I was doing startups applying different problems trying to be solved by AI. And then in 2013, me and my co-founder, so there was 5 of us in total, started Unbabel. The whole idea of Unbabel is based on this very fundamental insight, which is people speak different languages, and that's not going to change. And we're not going to get to a point where we all speak one language. And so what happens is companies scale and enter new markets, they face a lot of challenges related to language, and it's across the board. It's not just CX, how do we support our customers in multiple languages, but it's also how do we sell our products? How do we market our products? How do we enable users to use our products? It's kind of challenges across the board. And so we started Unbabel at a time where artificial intelligence was having a huge impact in a lot of different areas, and translation was certainly one of them. And so we said, hey, why don't we build from the ground up a new system that combines machine translation with human translation to get a hybrid approach and the best of both worlds, where there's a constant feedback loop to improve the whole system. And we're applying that to solving different problems within the enterprise space when it comes to translation. So in the case of customer service, what we enable these companies to do multilingual customer support in a very seamless way by having a team anywhere in the world, and then using Unbabel to enable that team to communicate in 30 or more languages. And that was the first use case. And now we're really expanding that through the category of language operations to enable companies to do that across the entire business.
That's awesome. I know when you and I were chatting the other day, I immediately said to you, I said, Vasco, I could have used your product years ago at some of the startups we were at in New York City for 2 reasons. Number one, you just now that companies today are finding it much easier to find customers everywhere, right? Not just in your city, or not just in your state, or not just in your country, but all over the world, number one. And then number two, teams, man. Teams keep growing, Vasco. Teams keep getting to the point where, some of the companies we were at in New York City, we would have multiple languages working right inside of our offices, and translation issues or translation friction, or just different challenges of making sure that you understand a problem entirely, understand a customer's problem entirely. It can be difficult. So any type of technology or any type of product that's going to help companies and help teams do that better, you're heading in the right direction, my friend.
Thank you. Good to hear. Yes, I 100% agree.
So couple questions for you. Before we jump into team. So I think I have to ask, so you mentioned you and your co-founders, when you started to kind of surround this problem, there's some background in linguistics, and it sounded like you studied this, but was there like one or what was the draw here, Vasco? Was there something in the world, or was there a problem that you saw inside of like an early business that you just knew that this was going to be something that big companies across the world were going to need help with? And then you also what was the draw to this space initially?
So definitely translation. Sometimes I say translation is future debt, meaning, it's a problem that won't disappear. And so once you start using translation to solve a problem of communication, most likely you will never stop using it, right? Because it enables your current resources to be able to deal with multiple languages in different areas. And so definitely was seeing that this is something that is both big, fundamental to companies' scale and growth, and not going away anytime soon. And so there was that. On the personal side, the strong connection to language from the beginning was always pulling me into this space. And then we were fortuitous in having a combination of a team that was really like my co-founder and CTO also did his PhD in machine translation in UPenn. So we had a team that was very AI language focused at a time where AI was starting to have a lot of impact. And then the trigger was started by really a conversation with a friend where he said, hey, look, I have an Airbnb and it's a pain in the ass because people reach out in English, which is fine, in French, it's fine. But then I have a lot of German people trying to rent my Airbnb in Lisbon. I don't speak German. This was a time where it was before deep learning. So I'm using Google. I have no idea what I'm saying. This is a mess. And we're like, this is the right time to solve this, And so we started exploring a prototype around it, and we saw, wow, like actually there's a huge amount of applications. And it was interesting because at the time, you were really seeing folks like Google Translate that didn't really care about the human side of it at all. We're like, yeah, look, this is going to be especially at the time, this will be a consumer-facing just for you to get a sense of what is being said there. But quality was not great. And then you had the folks in the translation space, which was like, yeah, we don't care about technology. Technology sucks, and we feel threatened, and so we're going to just use humans. Yeah. And obviously, this was 7 years ago, so a lot of things have changed. But we were in this moment where bringing these two areas together was incredibly powerful. And now what we see is, until now, a lot of the more traditional localization areas sit typically siloed inside different areas. So, within marketing, maybe marketing is hiring vendors to do their marketing content. Then you have product that maybe hires in-house translators to speed up the process of product translation. And then you have customer service that typically works with BPOs and says, actually, I need teams all over the world to speak the different languages. And there's no one scalable solution across the enterprise. And so I think that's going to be incredibly powerful. Imagine being a company and saying, actually, we'd love to, we saw a few users downloading our app in market X. We'd love to actually scale that and be able to do it, with a couple of clicks of the button, say, yep, great. Our team now can handle customer service, sales, marketing, and product all across different languages seamlessly, right? We're not very close to being able to do that, but we're not that far either, right? And that's where we want to get.
That's awesome. I think it's a super cool space. I also just think, as you and I were chatting the other day, it's one of these spaces that, if anything, it could be an accelerant, especially for startups and growth-focused companies that are thinking about really big things and changing and disrupting really big spaces. You don't need to necessarily start local. You built a tool that is going to give these future entrepreneurs and these future business leaders an opportunity to think really, really big right out of the gates. And I think that's pretty exciting, man. And then the last thing too is just having been a part of scaling many teams. It's the internal piece. I think that there's so much to be said around companies that are going to be investing in technology and investing in solutions that can help make sure that translation and understanding and collaborative energies are running as high as possible internally. So I think that's awesome.
Look, and I think you make a great point, because I think it's vastly underappreciated, the effort of scaling teams in general, but especially multilingual, multicultural teams. Yep. And so as you have teams in CX that suddenly need to span multiple countries around the globe with very different cultures, languages, high turnover rates, and ranging from areas where, if you hire a CX agent in the Philippines, maybe that's a career. That's something that they take very seriously. While maybe if you hire someone in Germany, that's a part-time job in the summer for a student, right? And so it's incredibly hard as you want to do this in scale and dealing with peaks and dealing with, growing in new markets. It's really, really hard. And I think what we see within Unbabel, it's such in a way, a small change, but with huge impact, right? Suddenly your agents have a tool that enables them to handle every language. And what this does is, not only it's more efficient, so much lower cost and be able to serve your customers in their preferred language, but you have a much better utilization of your workforce. And so what we see consistently is an increase in CSAT, because now you don't have 3 Germans and 2 French, you have 5 agents that can tackle any ticket, right? Which leads to faster time to first response, which leads to your ability to be able to think of teams from a product line perspective, or you have someone that really owns that product and can handle every language. So not being language dependent gives you the flexibility to optimize in a lot of different ways. And that leads to a much better experience for your customers.
100% agree. Yeah, I was just going to say, the customers are going to feel that more than anybody. They're going to feel that seamless experience that's happening internally, which is going to lead to a much better external positive customer experience. Vasco, I'd love to jump into the first CX pillar, my friend. Let's spend some time talking about
Yes.
the awesome team that you guys are building over at Unbabel. Give us a sense for how you've gone about building the team, number one, and give us a sense for what some of the different teams and the departments look like inside of your business today.
Cool. Yeah. So when we started, this wasn't my first startup, and one of the things that I felt was very strongly from the beginning really was the sense of, when team starts, there's a lack of certain expertise. Like you typically refer that in startups as, oh, we have technical debt, and that's a very well accepted thing. I felt that the one thing we couldn't afford was emotional debt being built between the founders. And so we've put in place activities and situations and moments to help really pay off that emotional debt. And that became part of the DNA of Unbabel. And so our culture is still very much, values time together, doing things outside of the working environment and creating space for people to connect. There's a couple of studies that show that there's a strong correlation with having good friends at the place you work and your satisfaction.
Yep.
You want to go to a place where you have a connection with people, so that's important, alongside with a sense of mission and kind of feeling challenged in your work. And so that's been a lot of our drivers. I describe our culture as a culture of explorers, versus sometimes tech companies describe themselves as a professional sports team. So, we feel that it's more, we are trying to get to a place that nobody has ever gotten to before. We want to get to Antarctica before any of the other explorers. And for that, you need a very high performance team, but you also create a sense of camaraderie and bonding that carries you through the hard moments. And so in general, Unbabel culture tends to really value people that are mission driven, that are smart, fun, that are loyal, that have principles, and you see it around, and our teams reflect that. And so we're now at 180 people.
Nice.
We started in Lisbon, Portugal, but we have offices in the US. We have San Francisco, New York, and Pittsburgh. San Francisco being the headquarters in the US, and then in Europe we have Lisbon, London, and Berlin. London being the headquarters in Europe, and we've decided not to have a clear separation of, oh, we put engineer here and sales over there. I think there's a more prevalence for customer facing roles in the US because a lot of our customers are there, and a more prevalence roles of engineering in Lisbon because we started here and we had very strong ties to the local community. But we also, for example, have an AI team in Pittsburgh, and we certainly have sales and marketing also in Lisbon. So we think of it from a global perspective. I'm trying to think what other things are relevant in terms of the team. I don't know if there's specific things you want me to
no, this
to
is
talk
fantastic.
about.
I mean, one question I have right off the bat, just from hearing you say that is, I got to imagine some of our listeners are thinking about what have been some of the big challenges having teams and offices everywhere, all over the world. This is a fun one because I think I'd love to kind of hear what some of the big things that you and the team have had to undertake. Number one, you've built a team that's already speaking different languages, right? They're in different countries, different parts of the world, different languages. But what were some of the challenges setting up these different teams in these different office spaces across the world?
Well, yeah, it's I think it's a very pertinent question. When we started in Lisbon, it was the beginning is always easier, right? There's like 10 people around the table, and everyone knows each other, and it's really when you start getting to a point, I mean, especially when you cross the 150 mark, where you start just not being able to have everybody know everybody. In our case, that happened earlier because people were in different offices. Ironically, pre-pandemic, so we used to have 5 offices in Lisbon, and we were very much thinking of more of a campus mentality, like a micro campus. But systematically in our surveys, the number one complaint was people wanted to be together in one space because they felt slightly disconnected, right?
Sure.
Which is ironic because we then moved to an amazing office in Lisbon, but then the pandemic hit, and so now everybody's like way more separated than before.
Right.
But at the same time, that kind of helped us in evolving towards having better communication methods for people that aren't in the same space. I think for example, one of the things that I see in terms of the challenge when you have a team in San Francisco and one in Lisbon is 8 hours difference. And typically what that means is that there's really a couple of hours of overlap. There's advantages to it where you can have a team finish in one time zone, hand over work to the other team, and by the time they're back, everything is done.
Yep.
But if you need collaboration, you end up having, in our case, San Francisco tends to wake up really early,
Yep.
and that very easily creates burn, right? Burnouts.
Yeah.
Where people are like systematically having meetings at 6 a.m. to be able to have overlap with Lisbon, and that's not sustainable. So you need to have autonomy of operations as much as possible in the different locations, and kind of have limited dependencies with other offices as much as possible, which is obviously in the world that we are right now, it's kind of impossible. People are all over. I think the other big challenge for us was, our culture, as I was saying, is there's a strong component of doing things together. And as we grew the different offices, we thought, let's think about this from a culture perspective, and then have subcultures in each of the offices that are cohesive and compatible with the main culture, but still differentiated to enable individuality, or the freedom of different expressivity in different offices. I think that was a good idea, but now with the pandemic, obviously, everyone is on Zoom, and so it's just harder to notice that difference. The team in one office versus the other, and how do you create that local identity that still fits with the main identity? So that work was, in a sense, a bit halted. I think we've so far are not, we have a lot of deep technical folks. We have a strong core AI team, but we're also very market receptive, and we tend to be very comfortable in front of customers and recognize and understand the need to have a very, very strong sales and marketing team. And so far, those things have been very much in balance. So I feel that we're not a engineering-driven culture or a sales-driven culture yet.
Yep.
Who knows, as we grow and become bigger, maybe that become more of a dominant role or a dominant part. It hasn't happened yet. So I think we've been fortunate to strike a really good balance on both fronts.
That's fantastic, man. I think that's really, really great. And I think the other thing too, that you made me think about is just, for folks listening to today's show, more than ever, customer-focused business leaders are going to need to get comfortable working in an asynchronous environment, because we don't know what this is going to look like. You and I were just talking before we jumped into today's show, but we don't know what next month's going to look like across the world right now. Doesn't even matter what country you're in right now. Like across the world, we don't necessarily know what tomorrow's going to look like. So now more than ever, companies need to be able to, I think, number one, you just nailed it, provide the autonomy with these different teams to make sure that they can do their own thing, right? If you're hiring great people that are smart, experienced, they know their subject matter expertise area, let them do their jobs, well, let them be creative. But then the other piece too is, because we maybe, for the last year and change, we've lost that ability to pull the team together, to have that collaborative energy, to have just some of the natural fun that comes from when a bunch of salespeople get to actually hang out with a bunch of engineers, or when marketing actually gets to spend time with ops and they understand some of the nuts and the bolts of what's going on in the day to day, and maybe it gives them an idea over a beer for how they can go market something better the next day to your future customers. I think what business leaders are going to have to think about is, how can you do those same things in an asynchronous fashion? You're going to have to do them in a remote fashion. And I know it's not nearly as fun, hopping on a Zoom chat as having a beer in a pub, but we're going to have to get comfortable with that. And I think that tomorrow's, business leaders are really going to have to come up with some creative ways of still having that feel, or having that human connection, that back and forth feel. But it might not be the way that we were doing it, 18 months ago. But I think it's awesome that you guys are doing some awesome stuff with that, Vasco.
Thank you. I mean, I think engineering serendipity is definitely a challenge. I think when you're physically co-located, there are just so many opportunities to bump into someone, to have a coffee, to
collisions,
just engage. Yeah, those collisions, right?
Yep.
And I think on one hand, being remote and being on Zoom, maybe it's more efficient from an pure efficiency. Hey, we're here to do something. We get together, we talk about it, we decide.
Yeah.
But for example, I've seen it, like today I hadn't had it for a while, had a breakfast with the newbies. So it was like breakfast with the CEO. And because we haven't had it since March, it was like 20 people, right? Or 30 people. And I was interesting to see kind of their feedback, and said, look, definitely onboarding in person is something that they think is really, really important. having that experience, even if it's just the first month or two in the office with people, connecting, understanding how the culture works, etc., is hugely beneficial and really hard to achieve. And the other thing, achieve over Zoom. And I think the other thing that we're seeing is it's really hard for young people in the beginning of their career to create their networks if there's not enough physical interaction.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
It's just really hard. You get on Zoom and it's all very transactional, and you're just trying to achieve a goal or a task. You
Yep.
don't hang around, and you don't have those kind of dialogues and moments that create a network that will bring you other opportunities, that will bring you career advancements in different ways. Those are super important.
And Vasco, even just seeing how your executive team interacts with customers that are coming through, or partners that are coming through, or providers that are coming through.
Yeah.
How some of your senior leaders actually are able to manage or engage a room of people. Like, humans are funny creatures, right? We need to see that stuff. We need to hear it. We need to feel it. We need to touch it. Most of us anyway, to learn this stuff. And
we are so biased. We're so biased for people that are physically close. It's like there's just a tendency of humans to create tribes with people that are around them.
Yep.
And I haven't quite seen the digital tools that enable us to really overcome that. And so my hope is, hey, we've been managing, but I would love to have some sort of, really have the optionality of having way more in people meetings, in people interaction, bringing people together. We're now already planning to organize our retreat again this year.
Right.
We estimate that by the time we organize it, everyone's going to be vaccinated. Excellent. And that opens up different opportunities, and bringing people from all over the world and spending some quality time. We'll see how things evolve until then, but I think that makes a difference.
That's fantastic. Vasco, I'd like to jump into the second CX pillar of tools. Let's spend some time talking about, so as you've built the business and as you built the team, I imagine, number one, I bet your toolkit has expanded to a much bigger place than you probably ever thought. But I'd love to hear you talk about tools for a couple of minutes. What are some of the things that you and the team have done to, number one, build the Unbabel toolkit that's allowed you to grow, and it's allowed you to scale, and it's allowed you to bring on all these different customers? I'd love to kind of hear how you guys built that toolkit, how you manage that toolkit, and how you kind of consistently go back to making sure that it's the right toolkit that you need to be able to achieve your goals organizationally.
Yeah, I find that a lot of times in the beginning, you end up doing a bit of premature optimization, of like, oh, we need to have the full stack and build it out. And we're going to have, it took us a while to get to Salesforce. We were using, other products. And then at some point we hired someone that was an expert in Salesforce, and was like, no, this is where we need to go. Now, in hindsight, did we need Salesforce at that point? We certainly need it now, but did we need it at that point? I think there's a sense of like, okay, we're a grown up company now. This is the things we should have, like we use HubSpot, obviously internally Slack, obviously goes without saying email, but then there's all sorts of little tools like Gong for sales, or GitLab for developers, or that are pretty much very well and wide accepted right now, and then I think are super important for us to be able to function as a company. I think from a tech stack specifically, we're mostly a Python place, so we tend to rely heavily on it with very few exceptions. We started out with MongoDB on the DB backend, but I think we've changed since then. I think we're now, like as you become bigger, it's weird. You also need things that are more established and that you can find people that have done that at scale.
Absolutely.
And so you end up falling back to things that are more tried and tested. Absolutely. Rather than go with untried new technologies, even though theoretically sometimes the new technologies give you an advantage because they've been built from the ground up to really benefit, given everything given where we are right now. It's the case of Salesforce, right? Everyone at some point uses Salesforce, but you'd find a lot of people that, at the beginning would be like, no, I think tool X is so much better for customer service. But then at some point it's very hard to scale on things that aren't proven for that scale.
100%. And I think you just nailed it too, where, once your business really starts to rip, once it starts moving, once you start picking up customers, picking up your revenues, you start to build the talent side. And you just nailed it, Vasco, where part of finding excellent talent is many of these guys and gals, they're going to come with their little toolkits to Unbabel, right? They're going to already know which tool is going to be able to maximize a specific area of the business. They're also going to have had a ton of practice with those tools, meaning maybe they've set it up at 3, 4, 5 companies already. Maybe they've already managed, a 10-time volume scale compared to what they're walking into. And it's actually going to be very simple for them to kind of plot out their map and and then the last part I was going to say is teams, right? Team management. I think you just nailed it. Where a big part of why you see so many, rocket ship companies using best in class SaaS solutions, it's because they're going to be able to rapidly train a growing team of people, right? People need to know how to use the tools to be able to effectively build an incredible customer experience. And frankly, part of best in class tools is it's easy to deploy, it's easy to train, it's easy to get people to stick, it's easy to people to understand how to use it. And then obviously it's always easy to continue to refine and optimize and get it better and better and better month over month. So spot on, man.
Thank you. Yeah, we see it across the board.
One follow-on question though. I imagine your customers, they've got wildly different toolkits. Has there been challenges, or has there been one or two key things that you and the team have figured out when it comes to having to work with all of these customers that have different toolkits? Has there been some challenges along the way? Have there been some learnings that you guys have kind of figured out nicely as you've grown around how to be pliable and flexible and work with other customers' toolkits?
So all of our customers have typically we deploy through CRMs, through Zendesk and Salesforce and Dynamics, and and so it was very important that we had those integrations. And we still feel sometimes whenever there's a potential new integration that is a hurdle, right? That we need to be better at very quickly deploying a version of an integration that enables customers to really interact with us seamlessly. And that aspect of seamless, I think it's very, very important. I think, I'm trying to think what other examples I could give internally of the kind of things that we're doing. But I think it's super important. I think that it's it's part of the strategy for us will be to have hundreds of integrations into all the systems so that all the experiences can be native. Ultimately, we want translation to be, the world translation layer should be invisible, should just exist to power communications in different forms, but it shouldn't require attention necessarily from each individual and effort, right? And that's what we're aiming for.
Love it. Vasco, as the team has grown, as the business has grown, as you brought more and more and more customers on board, I have to imagine that the third CX pillar of process was a big part of how you and the team kept great on the track and managed that growth and managed that scale, managed all the internal growth that you guys experienced as well. Can you spend a couple minutes talking about how Unbabel has thought about its process management? And then can you spend some time just thinking about some of the things that you've learned over these years of building the business that you would want some of our listeners to really think about? They're building their own startups, they're building their own teams, they're leading their own squads. What are some ideas that come to mind from your experience around what you've learned around process management and process refinement?
So, we definitely had to implement process and really think carefully about it. I think the trigger point sometimes is hiring someone that has done it many times before in whatever area, and they know what the process is, right? They come in and say, hey, look, this is how it could be improved. And the first time that happens, you feel like, no, like we're different. We don't need that, right? And in fact, I think the people that report to me sometimes have a sense that I don't like process. And what I always feel is, no, on the contrary, I don't like process too early because it stifles the agility to be able to weave and bob and kind of adapt. But I very much think it's completely crucial to scaling, right? I mean, like, lack of process prevents you from scaling. And there was certainly times where you needed to come in and really think about scaling. And so you needed people that had done it, that know what the process should be. How do you set up this team? What are the things we do for a ProQL scenario where you're trying to decide on use cases that aren't standard, and kind of how do we deploy changes? How do we communicate them? Kind of that becomes much more process driven. And I think when it's needed, it's absolutely crucial. And I think sometimes if it's a bit like a family. If you're for 3 or 4 people, you need less process. People just communicate abundantly, right? But as it scales, without process becomes massive chaos. And so that's something that we see is very, very important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Some of our listeners that have worked for me in the past are going to laugh when I say this, but I've been saying for years, proper planning prevents poor performance. And I say that typically when I'm talking about process, because number one, you just threw a bunch of P's together, but number two, it's when I think about process management, process refinement, process optimization, frankly, you're just giving certain folks within an organization the keys to be able to do the effective planning, right? That then can get socialized to the rest of the team, which then puts everybody metaphorically on the same page. And it's one of these ideas where it's, I think there's a number of companies out there in the world that part of why they invest so heavily on the process side, it's really just about everything that you talked about, Vasco, making sure that you understand people know what to expect. They know what happens when there's a change. They know what they need to do, what their given role on the pitch is, right? Depending on what position they play. And then I think lastly, it's humans. Most humans need to be able to have a place or a space that they can go to get answers. It's a very natural thing. And I think that many organizations, especially as your team gets bigger, especially as you got more offices across the globe, it's one of those things that makes.
And it's not a silver bullet, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. You need to invest in it.
Yep.
And I think there are people early on that thrive on the lack of process, and that's fine. Like the ability to quickly shift. But as we grow and we have a lot of critical systems that need to be up, 99.999% of the time, where it matters, agents are constantly using it to send emails and communicate, and a breakdown in communication could mean a big issue for one of the customers. So as that becomes more like we're now doing a couple billion words a year, in order to have a system that has that level of reliability, you need to have process in place, right? In order to scale teams and still be efficient, you need to have process in place. And that process, like one thing we used to do, I think we early on, we would say, okay, we need process, we'll go read it and then implement it. And that's fine, but there's a learning curve. You're going to make a lot of mistakes in the beginning. Definitely. And it just saves you so much time when you hire someone that has done it, that they really understand what to do. It just, what works, what doesn't, and how do you get there faster.
Love it. Vasco, I'd like to dive into the fourth and the final CX pillar of feedback. So this is going to be cool because you guys have this tool that, number one, you're seeing all these words, all this information, all of these different, probably good, bad, and ugly points around feedback. But I'd love to hear you spend a couple minutes talking about some of the things that you and the team have done at Unbabel on the customer feedback side. And then I'd love to hear some of the ideas and the ways that you guys are thinking about for the employee feedback side of the business.
Yeah. So we, on the customer, actually on the employee side, it's easier. We have continuous evaluation. We use Amplify for constant surveys. Like there's a strong feedback loop. I feel that we have a good pulse there. I think on the customers, the challenge sometimes was that the thing that you need the most feedback on is quality of the output of the engines, of the translation. Ultimately, that's one feedback loop that is very important to get right from the beginning. And I think initially I would say one of the challenges that a lot of times at the same time you're building it's a bit like, you ask people what they want and they say a faster horse rather than a car.
Yeah.
Like when you're innovating, a lot of times people it's very hard to give you feedback on things they haven't seen, they haven't experienced enough to really understand, this is what I want. And so they'll gravitate for their known solutions, which might not be really what you're trying to do. But at the same time, without that strong feedback loop, you don't evolve, right? You get stuck and you're kind of on your own, developing and building on your own. And I think the customer feedback part of the process is absolutely key. I think one of the challenges on that discussion of quality of the feedback was that quality of translation was typically one of the core points of understanding how we're doing, what's the feedback from a customer experience side. And until we came along, there wasn't really a structured way of talking about quality in a way that is systematic, that customers could understand, relate to, and give feedback on. And so it's the subjective, like, how are things going? Oh, fine, not fine. Didn't like a text that I've seen or saw, And so we've developed this very sophisticated and kind of massive language quality analysis framework and pipeline that really goes in and uses MQM as a score and linguists to annotate and does like a lot of amazing things to produce a much more objective, fine-grained perception on ongoing quality, constant quality. So this process is always going, and that gives you a much more objective base of discussion about the feedback, right? So when a customer says, "Hey, I think this, like there's something wrong with the quality," we can actually run an annotation batch, or I would call it like run the LQA framework, come back with actual scores based on specific examples, and have that discussion, right? And so that ability to be more transparent at a quality level, which tends to be one of the areas that's more critical for customer feedback, certainly helped in one, fostering the relationships, but two, of having the right feedback that is not ambiguous, that is not subjective, and then incorporating that feedback again into the AI models.
Yep. That's awesome. And on top of it, you and the team have built a tool that allows other customer focused business leaders to be able to make sure that they can actually understand what their customers are actually telling them. So it's really cool that you guys found an incredible space. I think we all know that the world continues to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And part of that is going to mean this whole space here, Vasco, is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? As the world gets smaller, you guys have a huge market opportunity. So really, really cool stuff. Vasco, as we wrap up today's show, I do want to ask you, sir, if you were to have one or two pieces of advice for younger startup founders or up and coming, tomorrow's customer focused business leaders going to be running tomorrow's companies, what would be the one or two things that you'd want listeners to kind of take away from the things that you've learned with your own experience building your business?
I would say one, invest in team. Team in the end is the most important thing. I would say spend time initially really understanding the scope of the problem, and understanding is like spend the first couple of months, on actually sitting with potential customers and understanding deeply, because you'll find that your assumptions about the problem are hopefully correct, but not 100%. Right? Yeah. They're going to be, and that difference is going to make a big difference in the speed to market. And then third is, once you do that, also don't let things sit internally, but actually expose them to customers. Get that feedback loop. So culture, I would say culture, expertise, and speed of execution are greatly benefited by this. By really caring about your team and making sure that you're paying off that emotional debt. Spending time to understand deeply your customers' problems. So the customer pillar. And then iterate quickly and put things out in front of your potential customers so that you don't end up having, building a Frankenstein nobody wants to use.
Yeah, I love it, man. That's fantastic. Last question. Who's your soccer team that you root for over there in Lisbon, sir?
Sporting Lisbon.
Oh, nice. Okay, very good. Are there heated debates in the offices or during match days or what? Or is it split or is
oh man, at some point,
everybody roots for?
Fortunately now, even in the Lisbon office, 40% of the people here are not Portuguese, so that dilutes things a bit. There was at some point we had to hey guys, how there was that big issue with some US companies be like, okay, no more politics discussion in the office. We had to say that for soccer, guys, okay, don't bring soccer into this.
Leave it at the door. That's
awesome. Leave it at the door. You can discuss politics all you want, just don't discuss soccer.
You could get some big team debates going that way, my friend.
Oh man, because then you get also people from the UK and they're absolutely fans of whatever, Manchester, Liverpool, whatever it is, right? And so for a lot of people, soccer becomes a religion. It's because there's very little rational and scientific basis. It's easy to just go on and on forever, right?
Forever. It's exactly. Yes. I love it. Vasco, this has been an absolute pleasure. Before we wrap, where can people find out more about you, sir? And where can people find out more about Unbabel?
So Unbabel, just go to unbabel.com. That's unbabel.com. We're also, all the social media, but our website has been just rebranded and it has a great work done by the marketing team. I think it's doing a great job of explaining what we do and giving you all the message about me. I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter, just Vasco @justVasco. These days I'm less in social media than I used to. I've decided to take a break for a little bit. Especially during the summer post-pandemic, I was getting a bit saturated. But always on LinkedIn, and just shoot me an email as well.
Fantastic. Vasco Pedro, thank you so much for joining the CX Chronicles podcast. We're going to look forward to seeing what you and the team at Unbabel do moving forward, my friend.
Thank you, Adrian. This was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.